There's something almost ritualistic about pressing play on a film that once haunted the corners of my adolescence, a film that felt dangerous in the way ghost stories told by older cousins once did, half-truths wrapped in the warm thrill of fear. Tonight, I'm inviting you, my fellow literature enthusiasts, to curl up with me in that flickering space between fiction and something more primal. Welcome back to Frame Shift. It's always a joy to see you here, ready to dig beneath the surface of cinema, not just to be entertained, but to understand, to wander through the architecture of a story, the way one might walk through the halls of a cathedral, head tilted back, taking in the carvings high above. If you haven't yet, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and stayed for the journey. It means more than I can put into words, knowing there's a shared audience for this kind of conversation, a corner of the internet that treats films as texts, as living myths, as mirrors that catch the odd angles of our own souls. And let's be clear from the start, what follows isn't a review in the conventional sense. This isn't about telling you whether you should watch this movie. This is a meditation, an excavation, an intellectual wandering meant for those who love the taste of language as much as they do the scent of old film reels, who find in horror and fantasy not cheap thrills, but intricate worlds with their own strange poetry. When I think back to the first time I saw it, I can almost smell the living room, old couch cushions, a hint of popcorn salt, the faint ozone smell of a CRT television. I was younger, certainly not ready for the marriage of slasher violence and surreal dread that unraveled across the screen. And yet, I was hooked. It wasn't the gore that caught me, it was the idea, the way the film existed at the crossroads of two worlds I already knew. It was like watching two myths meet in some forbidden clearing in the forest, each bringing their own weapons, their own rules of engagement, their own gravitational pull. In hindsight, that's probably what gave it such staying power in my mind, not the scares, but the mythological collision, the way it seemed to ask questions about fear itself. What happens when two nightmares recognize each other? When the monsters at the edge of your dreams begin to acknowledge one another's existence? It's not just spectacle, it's an existential dare. The story opens not with subtlety, but with a sort of fever dream bravado. It lays its cards on the table in a matter of minutes. We are in a world where fear has currency, where the memory of violence can be as potent as violence itself. I remember feeling a strange sense of awe at how unapologetically it leaned into the premise. There was no hand-holding here, no slow spoon-feeding of backstory for the uninitiated. You either knew the rules or you learned them quickly, and I liked that. It reminded me of being thrown into a foreign city at night. You don't speak the language, but the lights and the shadows tell you enough to keep moving. That's one of the underappreciated qualities of genre films, especially horror. The world building is often invisible, embedded in the gestures, in the way characters speak, in the small, half-forgotten details that tell you the danger is older than the people facing it. On its surface, the plot is deceptively simple, almost primal in its construction. A force that once terrorized a small town has been weakened, not because it was defeated, but because people stopped believing in it. Fear, like faith, requires an audience. And so, in a kind of twisted resurrection, another, equally relentless entity is unleashed to stoke the fires of terror once more, to make the townsfolk whisper the old name again. The plan works at least at first, but the irony and the genius of the story is that you can't summon one predator without risking the wrath of another. Soon, these two forces are not allies, not even competitors in the polite sense, but raging storms that cannot coexist. The humans in the middle are just that, caught between nightmares, scrambling for survival in a war they didn't start and can't possibly win. I've always loved stories where the stakes feel layered, where the obvious danger isn't the only one. Yes, there's the physical threat, the bodies piling up, the impossibility of escape, but there's also the subtler dread of watching two great powers turn their gaze on each other. You can sense the shift in the air when the creatures realize they're no longer just using one another. They're in competition for the same territory, the same prey. It's the moment in a chess game when the middle board becomes crowded, and every move has the potential to tip the balance entirely. And here's where the fun begins, not for the characters, certainly, but for us. We know it can only end one way, with blood and fire and a sense of finality that, paradoxically, is never quite final in horror. But how we get there, that's the dance worth watching. What fascinates me is how the film plays with identity and fear as shared cultural currency. Each of these central figures embodies a different archetype of terror. One is the silent, unstoppable force, the kind of monster you can run from but never truly escape, the inevitability of doom given flesh. The other is talkative, mocking, almost playful in cruelty, the predator who enjoys the chase as much as the kill, who makes the fear personal. Watching them interact is like watching two entirely different philosophies of horror collide. And in that collision, the film asks an unspoken question, which scares you more, the predator you can see coming, or the one who toys with you before the end? For me, that question lingered long after the credits rolled. I found myself replaying scenes in my head, not to marvel at the effects or the choreography, but to consider what each represented, almost as if they were symbols in some twisted morality play. There are moments here that flirt with the absurd, and yet that absurdity feels almost necessary. It's the operatic quality of the violence, the way the confrontations escalate into something so spectacularly over the top that it stops feeling like realism and starts feeling like folklore. And maybe that's why it resonates with me on such a personal level. As someone who grew up on cautionary tales, on stories meant to keep children from wandering into the woods alone, I recognize the bones of the narrative. The monsters may wear modern masks, but they're doing the same work ancient monsters always have, reminding us of boundaries, of dangers we cannot tame, of the thin line between survival and annihilation. And yet the film is also wickedly entertaining. It never forgets that part of horror's purpose is release, to let us confront our fears in a controlled setting, to laugh nervously after the jump scare, to feel our hearts race without truly being in danger. That's a fine balance to strike, and here it's struck with almost mathematical precision. Just when the tension reaches its peak, there's a jolt of humor, or an action beat so exaggerated it invites applause rather than screams. In that sense, it's almost like a roller coaster. The climb, the drop, the rush of adrenaline, the relief of the brakes engaging at the end. You get off feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. The twists are not so much about shocking revelations as they are about shifting the ground beneath our feet. Just when you think one side has the upper hand, the tide turns in some delightfully grotesque fashion. The humans, ever the wild card, manage to intervene at critical moments, sometimes tipping the balance, sometimes just getting caught in the crossfire. And the final confrontation, well, let's just say it delivers. Not in the sense of offering a tidy resolution, horror rarely grants that, but in giving us the catharsis of seeing these two forces push each other to their limits. It's a battle that feels both epic and personal, as though they've stopped fighting for dominance over the world and started fighting for dominance over each other's existence. Even now, years later, I find myself returning to it not for nostalgia's sake, but because it scratches a very particular itch. It's the rare piece of horror that understands its own theatricality, that leans into its mythic roots while still winking at the audience. Watching it again is like revisiting an old urban legend, not because you've forgotten the ending, but because the telling itself is the point. And in that telling, you're reminded of the strange, beautiful truth that fear, when shared, can be a kind of communion. It can bind us together, sitting in the dark, waiting for the next scream, the next laugh, the next impossible twist. The first images feel like waking from a half-remembered nightmare, the kind where the details blur but the atmosphere clings to you. Shadows loom across familiar streets, but there's something wrong about them, as if the darkness itself is whispering names you haven't heard in years. The film wastes no time on gentleness. Instead, it plunges us directly into the psyche of its more talkative predator, his voice like a grin you can't quite see, dripping with the smugness of someone who has tasted victory far too often to imagine defeat. He isn't merely speaking to the audience, he's addressing the absence that has starved him. Fear has become a forgotten language in his old hunting grounds, and without it, he's fading. Death is nothing to him, irrelevance is. That's the wound this opening sequence traces, a killer not dead but dormant, like a ghost trapped in the amber of other people's forgetting. It's in this void that a plan is born, not out of desperation, but out of a feral cunning. If the people have stopped fearing him, then the people must be reminded of what it means to shiver in the dark again. And for that, he needs a proxy, a brute force that will do the carving while he lurks behind the curtain. What follows is part summoning, part manipulation, and part cruel experiment. In some half-hidden liminal place between worlds, he reaches for a mask, a machete, and the hulking figure attached to them. The other one doesn't need persuasion. Violence is his only language, his pulse. He is unleashed not like a soldier given orders, but like a wolf shown an open gate. From here, the camera turns its gaze toward Elm Street, a place that has carried its own legacy of nightmares for decades. The houses look harmless in daylight, their lawns kept, their mailboxes standing. But inside one of them, a group of teenagers are engaged in the timeless ritual of filling the evening hours with careless laughter and whispered rumors. There's a sense, as they speak, that they're living in a bubble of borrowed peace, ignorant of the quiet war beginning to stir. Among them, one girl seems less at ease. Her name is Lori, and though she smiles, there's a thread of melancholy in her eyes. The conversations drift, as teenage conversations often do, toward boys, toward the past, toward things better left unsaid. And it's in that vulnerable space that the first shadow falls. The intrusion is brutal and swift. The hulking figure, silent, unstoppable, slips into their world like a blade into soft fabric. There's no warning, only the sudden, grisly punctuation of his arrival. The film doesn't linger on the gore. Instead, it lingers on the shock, on the way the laughter dies mid-breath, on the widening eyes that try and fail to make sense of what's happening. For Laurie, the horror is compounded by something she can't yet articulate, a sense that this violence isn't random, that it's threaded to something much larger. When the police arrive, the air is thick with disbelief. This is a neighborhood where horrors are meant to be whispered about, not relived. The authorities try to maintain control, but the truth leaks in through their body language. They know something. They've seen this pattern before. And already we see the first threads of the talkative predator's plan beginning to weave through the fabric of the town. The story of the murder, and the faint echo of the old name attached to it, begins to circulate. A seed of fear is planted. In the aftermath, Laurie begins to sense she's not entirely alone in her unease. At school, conversations ripple, half speculation, half gossip, but the undercurrent is fear. It's here that we meet Will, her former boyfriend, who has been locked away in a psychiatric facility for reasons that begin to take shape only later. The institution is presented as cold and watchful, its walls holding more secrets than its patients do. Will and his friend Mark have not forgotten the predator whose name the town has buried. They've been kept in this place, medicated and monitored, precisely to ensure that the truth never spreads. For Mark, the need to speak about it is urgent. For Will, it's personal because Laurie is still out there, unaware of what's circling her. The plot moves like a fever, sometimes racing, sometimes slowing to a crawl, giving us just enough space to catch our breath before the next escalation. The predator in the shadows watches as his pawn does the dirty work, each kill a drumbeat that brings the town's fear closer to the pitch he needs. But here's where the first complication creeps in. His pawn doesn't stop. Violence is not a tool to this brute, it's the entire vocabulary. Soon, bodies are piling up in ways that draw attention to the wrong monster. The plan was never meant to hand over the stage permanently, and the first hints of tension between the two emerge, not as a direct confrontation, but as the quiet recognition that this alliance is temporary. Meanwhile, Laurie begins to dream. These aren't ordinary dreams, though they wear the familiar clothes of her past. They carry the strange, oily quality of being manipulated from within, guided by an unseen hand. She catches glimpses of a burned face, of eyes that know her in ways she can't explain. When she wakes, the unease lingers, clinging to her skin. The dreams bleed into waking life when she meets up with friends, only to find that they too have been touched by them, visions of someone they can't quite name, but whose presence is undeniable. The town's collective memory is waking up, and with it, the danger escalates. Will and Mark seize on this moment. They escape the institution in a desperate bid to reach Laurie before she becomes another casualty. Their breakout is raw and unpolished, not the slick maneuver of action heroes, but the frantic scramble of two young men with no plan beyond survival. Along the way, Mark's backstory surfaces in jagged fragments, revealing the personal losses that fuel his determination. For him, this isn't just about saving lives, it's about reclaiming the truth that's been stolen from him by those who thought silence was safety. The paths of these characters converge again in the flickering light of a party, because in horror, the oblivious crowd is both a shield and a trap. The music is loud, the air thick with smoke and sweat, but in the corners of the frame, danger is already closing in. The hulking figure moves among them like a shark through dark water, and when the first screams cut through the music, it's already too late for some. The chaos is immediate and complete, a stampede toward exits that only bottleneck the panic. In the confusion, Laurie, Will, and the others barely manage to escape, but not without losses that harden their resolve. They're no longer just reacting, they're beginning to piece together the scale of the nightmare they're trapped in. And yet, the predator in the shadows is growing impatient. The fear is building, yes, but it's being misattributed. Too many eyes are on the hulking figure, too many whispers of his name instead of the one that matters. There's a bitterness in the way he begins to invade the dreams more directly now, clawing his way into the minds of the survivors, branding himself there before the brute can claim them in the waking world. The tug-of-war is beginning, and the humans caught in the middle are starting to realize that survival will depend on understanding both monsters, not just running from them. By this point, the film has established its rhythm. Bursts of shocking violence followed by tense, unraveling conversations where the truth edges closer. The characters are no longer safe even in daylight, and the distinction between reality and dream begins to blur in subtle, unsettling ways. Doors that were closed moments ago are suddenly open. Friends turn their heads at impossible angles. Time skips without warning. It's the sort of creeping unreality that literature often uses to unsettle the reader, and here, it works with the same slow-burn precision. The first half of the plot builds toward a point where all the players, human and otherwise, are circling each other. Laurie is beginning to remember fragments of her own past that connect her to the deeper history of this conflict. Will is wrestling with the guilt of having been absent when she needed him most, determined now to protect her at any cost. Mark is growing reckless, his desperation making him a liability even as it drives him forward. And above them all, the two predators are circling, each one unwilling to let the other dominate, each kill now serving as both sustenance and challenge. It's in the final moments of this stretch of the story that we see the balance start to tip. A plan begins to form, not one born of confidence, but of sheer necessity. If they can somehow turn these two monsters fully against each other, maybe, just maybe, they can create enough chaos to slip away in the crossfire. But that's a plan for another time. For now, the shadows are lengthening, the body count is rising, and the dreams are getting harder to wake from. Somewhere in the night, two legends of fear are sharpening their weapons, not for the humans, but for each other, and the town, whether it knows it or not, is about to become the arena. The night does not fall quietly, it drops like a guillotine, sudden and irreversible. By now, the air in the town feels different, charged with the static of too many overlapping nightmares. It's the sort of tension you can taste, metallic and bitter, as though the world itself knows that something is coming. Laurie, Will, Mark, and the others have found only a fragile shelter in an abandoned outbuilding on the outskirts of town. The place smells of damp wood and rust, but it's quiet enough to hear each other breathe, quiet enough to pretend, for a moment, that they are out of sight. But even here in the cold shadows, the dreams find them. And with the dreams comes the voice, slick and venomous, speaking their names as though savoring each syllable. The dreamscape is his territory, and he prowls it with the ease of someone who knows every crack in the pavement, every hiding place, every blind turn. For Laurie, the dreams grow sharper now, less like passive visions and more like traps designed just for her. She finds herself in her childhood home, the air thick with the scent of her mother's perfume, only to turn a corner and find the walls dripping with blood. She knows she's asleep. She can feel the wrongness pressing in from all sides, but that knowledge doesn't make her any less vulnerable. And when the burned face leans in close, whispering promises of what he will do if she gives in to fear, it takes all the will she has to wrench herself awake. In the waking world, the hulking figure is never far behind. He's methodical, moving like a shadow stitched into the fabric of the town. His pursuit is wordless, relentless, a kind of violence that doesn't need to explain itself. By now, the survivors understand they are living on borrowed time. Each of them knows, deep down, that not all of them will make it to morning. The unspoken truth hangs between them like a low-hanging branch they can't avoid. They are not trying to win, they are trying to last long enough to outlive the other victims. It's Mark who pushes the conversation toward what they've all been circling around. "We can't fight them both," he says, his voice frayed with exhaustion. "We make them fight each other." The idea is insane in its simplicity, and yet it makes a brutal kind of sense. These two predators have already begun to clash in the margins, stepping on each other's kills, undermining each other's influence. If the humans can just push them harder into open conflict, maybe they'll be too focused on each other to notice the people slipping away. Laurie doesn't like it, it's too dangerous, too unpredictable, but she doesn't see another path forward. Survival in this moment means playing with fire and hoping not to be the one burned. The plan takes shape in pieces. They will need to pull the Dreamwalker into the waking world, where the brute's physical dominance will level the field. That means finding a way to confront him in a dream while tethered to something real, an anchor that will drag him out when the moment is right. The logic is desperate but grounded. The Dreamwalker is most dangerous in his own territory. Remove him from it, and he bleeds like anyone else. It's a theory whispered in half-belief, but it's all they have. Their preparations are rushed, clumsy, fueled by adrenaline. They gather whatever they can, improvised weapons, canisters of fuel, things that will burn, things that will cut. Every moment spent preparing is a moment closer to discovery. And inevitably, discovery comes sooner than they'd like. The hulking figure finds them first, his shadow cutting across the thin light spilling from the building's doorway. There's no time for finesse. The survivors scatter, luring him toward the industrial area on the edge of town, a place of rusted machinery, long-abandoned warehouses, and the smell of oil clinging to the air. It's here they intend to set the trap. But the Dreamwalker doesn't wait for the plan to unfold. He worms his way into Laurie's mind mid-flight, dragging her into a vision so vivid she nearly forgets the danger around her. She's underwater now, in a place that should feel calm but instead feels suffocating. Shapes move in the murk, shapes that speak with his voice, promising that she will drown here, in her own mind, before she ever reaches safety. But Lori fights back. She knows this is the moment. Somewhere far away, Will's voice is calling her name, pulling her toward the surface. She reaches for it, and in that instant, the dreamwalker is yanked from his world into the waking one. The transition is violent. He hits the ground screaming, disoriented, his body suddenly subject to all the limitations he spent decades sidestepping. And waiting for him, machete in hand, is the brute. The collision is immediate. No posturing, no words, just an eruption of violence so raw it feels like the earth itself should recoil. Metal clashes, flesh tears, and for the first time, the survivors see these two legends bleed. The fight is chaos incarnate. The brute's swings are wide, devastating, meant to crush in a single blow. The dreamwalker is faster, more agile, striking in flurries meant to cut deep before darting away. Every impact is an earthquake, every missed strike a chance for one of the humans to be caught in the crossfire. The survivors keep their distance, weaving through the wreckage of the warehouse, their eyes flicking between the battle and the exits. This is what they wanted, but watching it is something else entirely. There's a strange, almost mythic quality to it, as though they're witnessing two gods locked in a battle for supremacy. Their human lives nothing more than collateral. The tide of the fight shifts constantly. One moment, the brute has the upper hand, driving his opponent into a wall with enough force to crack concrete. The next, the dreamwalker has turned the environment to his advantage, using chains and jagged metal to bind and slash. Blood paints the floor in arcs, steaming in the cold night air. The humans try to intervene where they can, tossing fuel, lighting fires to corral the fight toward the docks, where they've set the final stage. But intervention comes at a cost, and one of them, Mark, pays it. His attempt to distract the brute ends in a brutal, bone-crushing blow that drops him instantly. There's no time to mourn. His sacrifice becomes part of the momentum that pushes the fight toward its climax. By the time they reach the docks, the battle has taken on a rhythm of its own. The air is thick with smoke and salt water, the creak of wood underfoot mixing with the clang of steel. Here in the open space, there's nowhere to hide, no walls to break through. Every strike is deliberate now, fueled not just by rage but by the awareness that this will end one way or another. The survivors fan out, setting the last pieces of their trap into motion, fuel poured along the edges, explosives wired to whatever old equipment they could rig in time. The final minutes are a blur of brutality. The brute drives his machete into the dreamwalker's side, pinning him momentarily, only to take a barrage of claw strikes that shred his mask and leave him staggering. They are both slowing now, their movements less precise, their bodies giving in to exhaustion. It's in this moment that Lori seizes her chance. With Will at her side, she ignites the line of fuel, sending a wall of fire racing toward the fighters. The explosion is deafening, a bloom of heat and light that swallows them both. When the smoke clears, the dock is half destroyed, its timbers splintered and smoldering. The water below churns with debris, and for a moment there's nothing, no movement, no sound but the hiss of cooling metal. The survivors, battered and burned, pull themselves away from the edge, their legs shaking under the weight of what they've just seen. It feels like the end, the kind of end that demands silence rather than celebration. But horror has never been a genre that offers clean endings. From the water, a shape emerges, massive, deliberate. It's the brute, dragging himself onto the wreckage, his machete still in hand. And yet there's something different in his movements now, slower, almost hesitant. Then behind him another figure rises, burned but unbroken, his grin visible even at a distance. The sight is impossible, maddening. Both are still alive. Both are still dangerous, and though they are bloodied and staggering, the hatred between them is undimmed. The final moments are wordless. The two lock eyes, their bodies tensing for another round, but instead the brute turns away, disappearing into the mist of the lake. The dreamwalker stands there a moment longer, watching, before fading back into whatever shadow he calls home. The survivors don't follow. They can't. The fight is over for now, but the war between these two forces is eternal, bound to flare again in some other unlucky place. As dawn breaks over the ruined dock, Lori and Will walk away together, their faces drawn but determined. They have survived the night, though neither can say for certain what that survival means. The world feels altered, as though the ground beneath them has shifted in ways they can't yet see. Somewhere out there, the two nightmares still exist, still waiting. And in some corner of her mind, Lori knows she will dream of them again, not as distant legends, but as something far more personal. They leave without looking back, because in stories like this, looking back is how you get pulled under. And yet, the truth follows them. The real horror was never about which monster would win. It was about what happens to the people caught in the middle when gods decide to fight. Laurie exists at the center of the chaos, though she begins as someone who doesn't know it yet. When we first meet her, she's not the hardened survivor horror films so often offer us, but rather someone caught mid-step between adolescence and adulthood, still carrying pieces of her younger self in the way she moves through the world. She's cautious but not paranoid, kind but not naive, at least not in the way that makes her blind to danger. Her arc is one of reluctant awakening, and watching her is like watching a quiet ember gradually find enough air to become a flame. At first, she reacts to events like most of us would, confused, desperate for reassurance from authority figures who seem far too quick to dismiss her instincts. But as the ground erodes beneath her, she starts to find her own footing, shifting from passivity to determination. What's compelling about her is that this transformation doesn't happen in a single moment of cinematic bravado. It happens in increments, in the way her eyes harden after each loss, in the way her voice becomes steadier when speaking the names others are too afraid to utter. She doesn't so much shed her fear as learn to carry it without letting it weigh her down. Will, on the other hand, feels like a ghost returning to a place that's moved on without him. His time in the psychiatric facility has left him frayed at the edges, cautious in his movements, as though every decision might still be monitored. The tragedy of his character is in the way his absence has defined him in Laurie's life, not as a betrayal, but as a gap she never fully understood until he reappears. He moves with a mix of urgency and hesitation, a man aware of how quickly time slips through your fingers when you're not allowed to live it. His loyalty to Laurie is clear from the moment he steps back into her orbit, but so is his guilt. You can see it in the way he hovers protectively, the way he tries to absorb the danger so she won't have to. What makes him interesting is that he's not the classic heroic male lead. His strength isn't in physical dominance, it's in persistence, in an unshakable refusal to abandon the people he cares about again. The film lets him falter, lets him feel fear, and in doing so, makes his courage all the more real. Mark's energy is different, sharper, more restless. There's a kind of electricity to him, a twitchiness born of years spent fighting a war most people pretend doesn't exist. He's the one most likely to speak the forbidden truths out loud, to rip away the polite fabric of the town's silence and show people the rotting structure underneath. But that urgency is a double-edged blade. His recklessness makes him brave enough to act when others freeze, yet also places him in situations where survival becomes a matter of luck. There's tragedy in his arc, because we can see from early on that he's the kind of person who will burn himself out for the sake of others. His determination isn't about winning, it's about making sure the truth is remembered, even if it costs him everything. And in the end, it does. His death is brutal, but it's consistent with the way he's lived. Headlong into danger, unwilling to be a passive witness. The supporting friends who orbit Laurie in the early acts serve as more than just fodder for the body count. They're mirrors for what she could be if she chose to stay in denial. They fill the spaces between horror beats with the everyday rhythms of teenage life, but their fates are reminders of how quickly those rhythms can be shattered. The ones who dismiss the unease, who laugh off the warnings, are the ones who fall first. It's not about punishment so much as it is about inevitability. Those who can't adapt to the shifting reality are swallowed by it. Through them, the film underlines a harsh truth. Survival isn't just about physical strength, but about the ability to accept that the rules of the world have changed. And then there are the two forces at the heart of the story, the predators whose conflict overshadows everything else. The burned man of the dreamscape is more than just a killer, he's a manipulator, a craftsman of fear. His weapon isn't his glove, it's the intimacy of his violence. He doesn't simply attack. He taunts, he personalizes the terror, turning it into a game where his victims' reactions are as satisfying as their deaths. In literary terms, he's almost Shakespearean, a villain who craves not just the act of killing but the performance of it, the audience that will remember his lines long after the blood has dried. His presence in the film is slippery, untethered from the physical world, which makes him more dangerous in some ways. You can run from a man with a machete, you can't run from your own mind. What makes him compelling is that his power is symbiotic. He needs you to believe in him, to speak his name, to give him form through your fear. Without that, he's nothing, and that fragility beneath the bravado adds an intriguing layer to his character. The brute, by contrast, is stripped of all that theatricality. He doesn't speak because he doesn't need to. His body is his entire language, every movement a declaration of inevitability. Where the dreamwalker plays with his food, the brute consumes it without ceremony. There's no pleasure in the act for him, no psychological game, only the fulfillment of a relentless drive. This makes him inhuman in a different way, closer to a force of nature than a man. You can't reason with him, can't barter for your life. His blank mask is a reminder that he's not here for revenge or for art, he's here because that's what he is. And yet there's something almost tragic about his simplicity. Unlike his rival, he doesn't need to be remembered, he doesn't crave an audience. His existence is in the doing, and that singularity of purpose makes him terrifying. Their dynamic is one of the most fascinating aspects of the film. In many ways, they represent opposing philosophies of fear, chaotic creativity versus mechanical inevitability. The Dreamwalker thrives in chaos, bending the rules, rewriting the logic of reality to suit his needs. The Brute operates within the narrowest of rules, but he never breaks them, and in that consistency lies his power. Watching them fight isn't just thrilling, it's like watching two ideologies clash, each trying to assert itself as the dominant form of horror, and the humans caught between them. They become pawns, prizes, and obstacles all at once. Laurie's relationship to each monster evolves over the course of the story. At first, both are simply threats, faceless dangers to be avoided, but as the conflict escalates, she begins to see the nuances. She learns how to weaponize the Brute's single-mindedness, how to provoke the Dreamwalker's vanity. Her survival hinges on recognizing that these are not interchangeable forces of death, but creatures with their own strengths and vulnerabilities. This recognition is what ultimately allows her to set the final trap, to stand in the crossfire and emerge on the other side. Will, too, develops in the shadow of these monsters. His fear of the Dreamwalker is personal, rooted in the stories and traumas that kept him confined for so long. But his encounters with the Brute force him to confront a different kind of terror, one that can't be outsmarted in the same way. It's in these moments that his bond with Laurie deepens. They aren't just fighting to survive, they're learning, in real time, how to navigate two entirely different kinds of predators. Mark never gets the luxury of that full evolution. His understanding of the monsters is clear-eyed from the start, but it's his inability to temper his reactions that seals his fate. He's a tragic figure not because he's ignorant, but because he can't stop himself from stepping into the line of fire if it means protecting someone else. In literature, he'd be the character whose flaw is inseparable from his virtue. The thing that makes him admirable is the same thing that kills him. Even the minor characters, orderlies at the institution, skeptical police officers, partygoers, are given just enough personality to make their death sting. The institution staff, in particular, represent a quieter form of danger, the systemic silencing of those who know the truth. They don't swing machetes or invade dreams, but their role in keeping the predators, existence buried, makes them complicit in the cycle of violence. By the time the final confrontation arrives, every character has been shaped by the duel at the story's core. Laurie is no longer the girl who smiled politely through unease. She's a survivor who understands the mechanics of fear. Will has shed the weight of his confinement, proving to himself that he can act decisively when it matters. Even in death, Mark leaves an imprint, his sacrifice a turning point that forces the monsters into the open, and the predators. Neither is truly defeated, but both are changed. They've tested each other's limits, drawn blood, and retreated with the knowledge that the other is out there, waiting. In the end, the film doesn't present its characters as winners or losers. Survival here is relative, fleeting. What matters is how they've been altered by the experience, how they've adapted or failed to. The humans carry their scars forward into whatever comes next. The monsters carry their grudges. And somewhere in that lingering tension lies the real heart of the story, a reminder that in worlds like this, characters aren't just vessels for plot. They're reflections of how we respond when the darkness takes shape and decides to walk among us. There's a certain pleasure in peeling back the layers of a film you've known for years, to discover the odd little truths tucked behind its glossy veneer of blood and spectacle. Sometimes those truths are stranger than the fiction they serve. This particular production was born from a decade-long tug-of-war, the kind of prolonged, whispered battle you rarely see play out in front of the camera. For years, the idea of pitting these two horror titans against each other was the stuff of fan speculation and studio folklore. What if that hovered in conversations at conventions and late-night TV specials? Scripts were written, then scrapped, then rewritten again, as if the project itself was haunted by the egos and expectations of the legends it meant to unite. When the final version at last crawled into production, it carried the weight of more than 10 years of false starts. The strangest part, it wasn't the actors playing the monsters who clashed first, it was the visions for how they should be represented. Each character had its own legacy, its own mythology, and its own fiercely protective fan base. The filmmakers found themselves balancing on a knife's edge. Give too much power to one monster, and you risk alienating half your audience. Make them too evenly matched, and you risk diluting the stakes. This balancing act bled into every department, from stunt choreography to marketing. where decisions as small as how many times each killer appeared in a trailer became points of heated debate. One of the most peculiar compromises involved the dream sequences. The Dreamwalker's world has always been surreal, malleable, a place where the rules bend in strange ways. But on set, creating that otherworldliness without drowning the fight in digital effects was its own challenge. The production leaned heavily into practical techniques, distorted sets built at skewed angles, colored lighting filtered through layers of smoke, and slow-motion camera tricks that stretched out moments into an unsettling dreamtime. The oddity here is that many of those dream sets were built on the same soundstages as the waking world scenes, sometimes just a wall away, meaning actors would step out of a boiling, crimson-lit nightmare into a chilly warehouse set in less than 10 minutes. Crew members spoke about the disorienting effect it had on everyone. By the end of a long day, reality itself felt oddly thin. The brute scenes brought their own set of peculiarities. The actor who embodied him, massive in frame and careful in movement, had to contend with a costume that was deceptively treacherous. The mask was stifling in the summer heat of Vancouver, and the machete, though dulled for safety, was still heavy enough to leave his arm aching after repeated takes. What's stranger is how those physical limitations seeped into the character. The slower, more deliberate swings weren't just stylistic choices, they were the result of working around the sheer heft of the weapon and the cumbersome gear. Yet somehow those limitations only made him more menacing, more inhuman. In that way, the physical discomfort became an uncredited co-writer of his performance. The stunt work between the two titans was its own strange ballet. Coordinating fight scenes between characters who had such dramatically different speeds and fighting styles required an almost absurd level of planning. The Dreamwalker's performer, slimmer and more agile, would dart in and out of range, while the brute's actor had to time his slow, crushing blows with enough precision to look lethal without actually connecting. One stunt coordinator later revealed that they rehearsed certain fight beats for weeks, breaking them down into almost mathematical patterns: step, swing, duck, grab, pull, like a deadly waltz. During filming, a few rehearsed moves still went wrong, resulting in some real bruises and at least one sprained wrist. No one ever filed formal complaints. For these performers, that kind of pain was almost an expected tax of authenticity. Perhaps one of the strangest behind-the-scenes quirks was the atmosphere between takes. Horror films have a reputation for creating intense, draining environments, but here, the set was often filled with laughter. Between takes, the Dreamwalker's actor, still in full makeup, the latex and burn scars stretched over his face, would crack jokes with the crew, sometimes punctuating them with absurd sound effects from his gloves. The brute's actor, still in his weathered mask, would respond with slow, exaggerated nods or mock menacing stares. It was surreal to watch these two icons of horror break character so casually, leaning against set walls or sipping bottled water through straws threaded under their masks. The location work added another layer of strangeness. The film's climax was shot on a dock built specifically for the production, designed to look like an aging, unstable pier that could collapse under the chaos of the final battle. It was built to be destroyed, but it had to survive long enough for multiple nights of shooting. The structure swayed unnervingly in the water, and the production crew had to constantly check for signs of wear. A few local residents reported seeing flickering lights and hearing distant screams at odd hours during those shoots, leading to rumors that the dock was genuinely haunted. Crew members played along, joking about extra shadows appearing in their footage. Then there were the weather troubles. Night shoots in the Pacific Northwest brought unpredictable rain, often drenching sets just before cameras rolled. The makeup team had to work overtime to keep prosthetics from peeling, and the wardrobe department developed quick-dry methods for the heavy costumes. In one instance, a scene had to be delayed because the fog machines were competing with actual thick, natural fog rolling in from the water, making visibility so poor that the cameras could barely catch the actors' movements. When the fog finally cleared, the footage had this eerie, diffused light that no one could have planned for. It ended up in the final cut. Trivia surrounding the Dreamwalker's glove is one of the more charming oddities. Over the course of production, multiple versions were used, some with real metal blades for close-up shots, others with safe rubber tips for stunts. At least one glove went missing from set, disappearing entirely and never resurfacing. Rumor had it that a crew member swiped it as a keepsake, but no one ever admitted to it. The brute's machete also had its own collection of stand-ins, including one made of foam so light it looked comically fake up close, though on camera it was indistinguishable from the real thing. The film's makeup work deserves its own spotlight in this tapestry of strange facts. The Dreamwalker's burned visage required hours in the chair each day, with layers of prosthetics glued, and painted to achieve the grotesque texture fans had come to expect. The process became so routine that the actor would nap through much of it, waking up with the transformation complete. For the brute, the mask was a relic of previous films, aged and weathered for this appearance. The team even added tiny, nearly imperceptible cracks and stains that would only be noticed by the most obsessive fans. They treated the mask less like a prop and more like a piece of historical evidence. The strangest and most unexpected story, though, belongs to the fans who managed to insert themselves into the production in the most literal way. While filming near one of the public locations, a small group of die-hard horror enthusiasts discovered where the crew was working and camped out just beyond the security perimeter. They brought their own makeshift costumes, burned masks, plastic machetes, and watched the night shoots from a distance. Eventually, someone from the crew invited them closer, and a few were used as background figures in a wide shot, their faces obscured but their excitement immortalized on film. None of them were paid, they didn't care. For them, just breathing the same air as their cinematic idols was enough. Even the editing room had its share of peculiar moments. Test audiences reacted so strongly to certain kills that the studio ordered some sequences to be trimmed, not for gore, but because they elicited laughter at the wrong moments. The editors had to find a balance between over-the-top spectacle and genuine horror, sometimes shaving seconds from a shot to tip the tone in the desired direction. One editor recalled a moment where the Dreamwalker's line delivery was so unintentionally funny when paired with the brute's silent reaction that they had to rework the audio mix to preserve the tension. There's also the oddity of the film's ending. Multiple versions were shot, each giving the upper hand to a different monster. Some cuts ended with the brute victorious, others with the Dreamwalker emerging from the water in triumph. The version that made it to theaters was chosen not for narrative reasons, but because test audiences reacted most strongly to its ambiguity. The studio realized that keeping the rivalry unresolved was the surest way to ensure fans would debate it for years to come. Somewhere in the archives, those alternate endings still exist, ghostly what-ifs that could have shifted the conversation entirely. Perhaps the most quietly strange fact is how much of the film's success rests on those tiny, often invisible adjustments made in the margins. A flicker of light here, a half-second pause in a fight there, a gust of wind caught on camera at just the right time. None of it could be scripted, and yet all of it mattered. These are the moments that remind you filmmaking is as much about the accidents as it is about the intentions. And so, behind the chaos and the carnage of the finished product lies this web of peculiar truths, stories of stolen props, whether that refused to cooperate, fans who became extras, and monsters who laughed together between takes. They are the heartbeat beneath the film's pulse of fear, proof that even in a story about inhuman forces, the most enduring tales are often the ones that happen when the cameras aren't looking. There's a moment early in the chaos, when the town's facade of calm is cracked open by violence, so sudden it feels like a thunderclap. It's not just a murder, it's the murder that signals a shift in the air, the kind of rupture from which there is no return. From a critical standpoint, this event serves as the ignition point, not only for the story's plot, but for its deeper thematic machinery. It's here that the film begins to weave its central question. What happens when fear becomes currency, traded and manipulated by those who know its value better than anyone? This opening act of brutality is not simply shock for shock's sake. It's an offering, a signal flare to the audience that we are entering a world where memory, belief, and terror are all intertwined. It's impossible to talk about the film without examining the symmetry it sets up between its two central forces. On one side, the manipulator of dreams, whose killings are as much performance art as they are acts of violence. On the other, the wordless brute, whose presence is not an invitation to fear, but an inevitability. Their first indirect collision, the moment when the brute's work begins to stir whispers of the other's name, stands as a turning point in horror cinema's experiment with crossover narratives. Critically, it's a study in how mythologies can be braided together without collapsing into parody. By letting these characters exist in the same world, but on parallel tracks for so much of the first half, the film builds tension not just toward their eventual meeting, but toward the recognition that their coexistence is fundamentally unsustainable. The party sequence, chaotic, loud, saturated with both youthful recklessness and the creeping dread that the walls are closing in, becomes, on closer inspection, one of the film's most crucial set pieces. It's not just a body count scene, it's a microcosm of the larger thematic struggle. Here, the brute operates in plain sight, his violence visible and direct, while the dream manipulator lurks unseen, whispering into the subconscious of the living. The dual nature of the threat, one tangible, one psychological, reflects the layered fears horror can tap into. The the fear of what's right in front of you, and the fear of what you can't see but can feel pressing at the edges of your mind. Critics who dismissed this sequence as gratuitous overlooked its structural importance. It's the place where the human characters fully realize they are being attacked on two fronts, and that their old survival strategies will no longer suffice. The psychiatric facility escape sequence holds its own critical weight, though its pacing is almost deceptively brisk. The institution itself is a symbol of systemic control, a place where inconvenient truths are sedated and contained rather than addressed. From a thematic angle, this mirrors the town's collective suppression of its history with the dream manipulator, how institutions, whether literal or societal, will bury uncomfortable knowledge if it keeps the surface looking stable. Will and Mark's flight from that place is more than just a plot device to get them back into the main action. It's a symbolic jailbreak from enforced forgetting. The fact that their escape coincides with the monsters' convergence is no accident. Both events represent the breakdown of the systems designed to keep dangerous forces apart. And then there's the dream within a dream sequence, perhaps the most surreal moment in the film's architecture. This is where the dream manipulator fully flexes his dominion, pulling Laurie into a reality so vivid it erases her sense of waking life. The imagery here, childhood homes warped into dripping nightmares, familiar faces twisted into grotesque parodies, has been criticized by some as indulgent. Yet from a critical perspective, these visuals are doing double duty. They are not just scare tactics, they are narrative shorthand for the way trauma reconfigures memory. By presenting fear through personal, intimate symbols, the film invites the audience to consider how horror stories, at their core, are often personalized for maximum resonance. The manipulator's power is not just in killing, it's in shaping the way his victims remember themselves. The dockside climax, of course, is the moment where critical and popular reactions often converge. This is the collision everyone has been waiting for, the point where the slow burn of parallel narratives finally ignites into a physical confrontation. And yet, the fight is not just spectacle, it's philosophy made flesh. The brute fights with blunt, unstoppable force, each swing of his machete a declaration that the world is fixed, immutable, bound by physical laws. The manipulator counters with speed, cunning, and improvisation, reshaping his environment mid-fight as though the rules themselves are negotiable. In watching them battle, we're not just watching a clash of killers, we're watching a debate about the nature of horror itself. Is terror more potent when it is inevitable, or when it is unpredictable? From a reception standpoint, this battle became the film's most divisive moment. Some viewers, especially fans of more grounded slasher traditions, found the dream manipulator's antics distracting, preferring the brute's relentless efficiency. Others saw in the manipulator's tricks a celebration of horror's capacity for invention, for bending the genre's boundaries. The studio, in releasing the ambiguous ending, ensured that this debate would outlast the film's theatrical run. Critics noted how this refusal to declare a clear victor echoed the unresolved nature of cultural fears themselves, how we never truly defeat the things that terrify us, but rather live in uneasy truce with them. One of the subtler and perhaps stranger critical readings of the film centers on the humans caught in the middle. Laurie's journey, from a bystander to an active participant in shaping the monster's conflict, mirrors the audience's own relationship with horror narratives. At the start, we are passive consumers, watching the patterns unfold. By the end, we've been enlisted. We are rooting for strategies, willing certain outcomes, emotionally invested in how the monsters will cancel each other out. Will's arc plays into this as well. His history with institutional silencing, his determination to act despite the impossibility of the situation, frames him as a stand-in for the audience members who have seen this dance before but still hope for a different ending. Thematically, the film operates on more levels than its premise might suggest. On one level, it's about fear as a sustaining force, something that must be continually fed to remain potent. On another, it's about the inevitability of conflict when two dominant forces occupy the same space. But dig deeper, and you find an undercurrent about memory, how it can be weaponized, how it can be erased, and how it can resurface in unexpected ways. The dream manipulator thrives on being remembered. The brute thrives whether or not anyone believes in him. Together, they create a tension between legacy and pure presence, between the symbolic and the tangible. The film's emotional resonance comes not just from its violence, but from its moments of stillness. Laurie standing in the wreckage of a once familiar place, while watching the institution's gates recede in the rearview mirror, Mark's desperate, doomed attempt to intervene in the final fight. These are the beats that linger in the mind after the credits roll. They ground the film in something human, reminding us that even in a story dominated by supernatural forces, the cost is paid in very mortal currency. Critically, it's worth noting how the film plays with audience complicity. We are drawn to the idea of seeing these monsters face off, yet every step toward that goal comes at the expense of human lives. The film doesn't shy away from showing us the collateral damage, but it also doesn't punish us for wanting the fight. Instead, it leaves us in that uncomfortable space where our desire for spectacle brushes up against our empathy for the characters. In doing so, it mirrors the ethical tension at the heart of horror fandom. The simultaneous craving for and recoil from the extremes of the genre, the ambiguity of the ending, the choice to let both monsters walk away, bloodied but unbroken, is perhaps the film's most significant critical move. It resists the neat closure that so many crossovers and versus stories aim for. Instead, it acknowledges that some conflicts are perpetual, that the forces they represent are too embedded in the cultural imagination to be destroyed outright. This refusal to resolve the rivalry doesn't just set the stage for hypothetical sequels, it also leaves the audience with the unsettling awareness that nothing is truly over. The monsters retreat, but they are never gone. In the years since its release, critical reassessment has softened some of the harsher initial reviews. What was once dismissed by some as a gimmick has been recognized as a rare instance of a crossover film that takes its own internal logic seriously. The interplay between the two monsters, the careful pacing of their eventual clash, and the thematic layering beneath the gore have all been cited as reasons it remains a subject of debate and fascination. Even its flaws, occasional tonal shifts, uneven character arcs, have become part of its charm, evidence of the impossible task it set itself and the audacity with which it tried to meet it. In the end, the film's lasting impact lies in its ability to be two things at once: a crowd-pleasing spectacle of horror icons locked in combat, and a layered narrative about the mechanics of fear, memory, and survival. It invites you to cheer and to think, to revel in its absurdity, and to be unsettled by its implications. That it does both without collapsing under the weight of its own premise is, in itself, a small triumph. And perhaps that's why, even now, people still argue about who really won, not because the answer matters, but because the question keeps the story alive. The making of the film was never going to be simple. It was the kind of project born in whispers and fan debates long before the first clapperboard ever snapped. Two titans of horror, each with decades of their own mythology, brought together under one cinematic roof. On paper, it sounded like the perfect storm. In practice, it was more like trying to bottle lightning. The production was less a straight road and more a winding, fog-covered trail, filled with unexpected detours, small miracles, and the sort of happy accidents that only happen when chaos is allowed to dance with creativity. The earliest stages were dominated by meetings that felt more like delicate peace talks than script discussions. Each character came with not just a fan base, but a legacy. The studio heads knew they were holding two cultural icons in their hands, and neither could appear weaker or less significant than the other. Writers found themselves in the strange position of balancing fictional egos. Every fight scene was examined for who landed the first blow, who took the most hits, who bled more. It sounds absurd, but to the people in the room, it mattered. These weren't just characters, they were modern myths, and myths have rules. Once the script began to take shape, the next challenge was tone. The dream manipulator's world had always been exaggerated, surreal, tinged with gallows humor. The brute's domain was colder, grounded, unflinching in its brutality. Combining these tones without making the whole thing feel disjointed was a daily puzzle for the director. The cinematography team devised a color palette that would subtly shift depending on which monster was dominating a scene. In dream sequences, reds and deep shadows saturated the frame, edges blurred, and movements were slightly slowed or sped up to create a sense of unease. In the brute scenes, colors leaned toward sickly greens and harsh whites, with cleaner lines and more static shots to emphasize his unstoppable mechanical nature. Filming began in Vancouver, a choice made for both budgetary reasons and the city's chameleon-like ability to pass for almost anywhere in North America. The crew quickly learned that Vancouver nights could be unforgiving. Temperatures dropped low enough that you could see the actor's breath between takes, which sometimes worked beautifully for the atmosphere, but wreaked havoc on makeup continuity. The prosthetic team faced an ongoing battle against the cold, using portable heaters and carefully timed touch-ups to keep latex from stiffening and peeling. The dream manipulator's makeup was a daily marathon. His actor would arrive in the makeup trailer hours before anyone else, sometimes at 3 a.m, to begin the process. Layers of prosthetic burns, airbrushed shadows, and hand-painted scars slowly transformed his face until the man underneath all but disappeared. He passed the time by telling stories, half jokes, half bits of his long history in the role, to the newer crew members, who often listened with the kind of quiet usually reserved for campfire legends. There was an intimacy to those mornings. By the time shooting began, the makeup team felt as much a part of the performance as the actor himself. The Brute's costume was simpler on the surface, but came with its own trials. The mask, an updated version of a design from earlier films, was made to look aged and battle-worn, with tiny details, scratches, discoloration, hairline cracks, that only the most dedicated fans would notice. The machete he carried came in several versions, one real metal for close-up shots, one lighter steel for fight scenes, and one foam for stunts that involved heavy impacts. The actor, towering and broad, gave the weapon such weight in his movements that even the foam version looked deadly on camera. What the audience didn't see was the toll the costume took on him. Under the mask and heavy jacket, the heat built quickly during action sequences, and he often had to step off set to gulp down water, the mask tilted up just enough to slip a straw through. Choreographing the fights was a production within the production. The stunt coordinator described it as designing two entirely different martial arts styles and then making them fight in the same movie. The Dream Manipulator's movements were quick, precise, often involving acrobatics or unconventional angles. The Brute's were slow but crushing, like watching a wrecking ball swing. The challenge was in making their confrontations believable. Each had to feel like a legitimate threat to the other, without betraying their established lore. Weeks were spent on rehearsals, often on soundstages marked with colored tape to represent set pieces that hadn't been built yet. It was less like planning a fight and more like planning a deadly dance. Between the grueling night shoots and the pressure of fan expectations, you might expect the atmosphere on set to be tense. But one of the strangest and most charming truths about the production was just how lighthearted things often were between takes. The sight of the two killers, still in full costume, leaning against a set wall and chatting about hockey scores or cracking jokes with the boom operator, became almost ordinary. Crew members told stories of walking onto set to find the Dream Manipulator playing cards with the grips, his bladed glove resting harmlessly on the table, or the Brute practicing juggling between shots with foam props. One particular night shoot became legendary among the crew. They were filming on the custom-built dock for the final battle, a structure that swayed subtly in the water and creaked underfoot. Midway through the shoot, a dense fog rolled in, not from the machines, but from the actual lake. It was so thick that the actors could barely see each other from 10 feet away. Instead of halting production, the director decided to embrace it. They adjusted the lighting, letting it bleed and scatter through the fog, creating a haunting, otherworldly glow. Those shots, raw and unplanned, ended up being some of the most atmospheric in the entire film. Weather was a recurring wildcard. Rain would soak sets unexpectedly, forcing the costume department into frantic drying operations. The makeup team became adept at doing emergency repairs under umbrellas, while assistants held space heaters as close as they dared to the actors' faces. The crew joked about the film being directed by the sky, since so many decisions on set were dictated by the weather's mood. Even with the challenges, there were moments of pure serendipity. In one dream sequence, a practical effect involving a bed rigged to collapse into a pit of fake blood went unexpectedly wrong. The timing was off, and instead of collapsing cleanly, the bed buckled slowly, almost like it was being pulled under by invisible hands. The director, seeing the playback, loved the eerie, unnatural movement so much that they kept it in the film. It became one of those details that audiences assumed was carefully planned, when in reality it was born of mechanical misfire. Some of the fun facts about production leaned toward the absurd. One of the prop gloves went missing mid-shoot and was never recovered, despite frantic searches. Theories ranged from an overzealous fan sneaking onto set to a crew member stashing it as a personal memento. A machete handle cracked in the middle of a fight scene and had to be taped together between takes, the repair so seamless it's invisible in the final cut. There was even a running joke among the lighting crew about haunted cables, electrical lines that seemed to fail at the exact same time every night, no matter where they were placed. Test screenings brought their own layer of intrigue. Several endings had been filmed, each giving the edge to one of the monsters. The final theatrical version, where neither is definitively victorious, was chosen after audiences responded most strongly to its ambiguity. The editor admitted later that choosing a winner felt too final, too small for the scale of the mythologies at play. The ambiguity wasn't just a marketing choice, it was a creative one, a way to keep the legend alive. And then there were the small human moments that no one outside the production would ever see, but that colored the experience for everyone involved. The Dream Manipulator's actor, after long nights in makeup and blood, would sometimes walk back to his hotel in full costume just to see the reactions of late-night pedestrians. The Brute's actor once accidentally frightened a visiting child on set, not by doing anything aggressive, but simply by turning a corner too quickly. He immediately knelt down, took off his mask, and let the kid try it on, transforming the moment from terror to delight. By the time the shoot wrapped, the crew was exhausted but bonded in a way only productions like this can create. They had weathered cold nights, physical strain, mechanical failures, and the ever-present weight of fan expectation. The final product was stitched together from planned brilliance and accidental magic, from rehearsed precision and unpredictable improvisation. And perhaps that's why the film still resonates, not just because of the spectacle on screen, but because behind every frame lies a story of the people who willed it into existence, against all odds, under the watchful eyes of two of horror's most enduring legends. The first thing you notice about the world of the film isn't the monsters, it's the way the world itself seems to be holding its breath. Streets that should feel safe are too quiet, the air a little too still, as though something invisible is watching. It's not an accident, it's by design. The settings in this story aren't just backgrounds, they're active participants, shaping the mood, steering the audience's expectations, and serving as silent accomplices to the horrors that unfold. From the opening frames, the camera moves through spaces that feel at once familiar and uneasy. The neighborhood where Laurie lives could belong to any small town in North America. Modest houses, manicured lawns, the gentle hum of sprinklers. But the cinematography strips away the warmth usually associated with suburban settings. The lighting is cooler, leaning into desaturated tones that make the streets look washed out, almost drained of life. In wide shots, houses seem isolated from each other, as though they've been quietly abandoned and no one has told the characters yet. It's a subtle visual cue. This is a place where danger doesn't need to invade. It's already woven into the fabric of the community. The dream manipulator's territory, of course, is another matter entirely. His world exists on a plane of its own, layered on top of reality like a parasite feeding off it. Production designers and cinematographers collaborated to create spaces that feel wrong in ways you can't always define. Hallways stretch too far, doors appear in places they shouldn't, shadows fall at unnatural angles. Colors are richer here, deep reds, sickly greens, the occasional blinding white, but they're never pure. Everything is slightly contaminated, like looking through glass smeared with grease. The dream sequences use distortion lenses and shifting focus to make the viewer's eyes work harder, to make them feel like they're chasing clarity they'll never find. Then there's the Brute's hunting ground, which couldn't be more different. His scenes strip away excess, leaving settings bare, functional, and grounded. Warehouses, barns, forest clearings, these places are given over entirely to physicality. The lighting is harsher, with sharp contrasts between light and dark. You can always see him clearly, even when he's lurking in shadow, because his threat isn't about surprise, it's about inevitability. His settings reinforce that. Open spaces with few places to hide, narrow corridors that funnel victims toward him. The camera often stays low when following him, framing his body as an unstoppable wall moving through the environment. One of the most striking contrasts between these two worlds comes in the transitions between them. When characters slip into dreams, the cinematography shifts subtly but decisively. Camera movements become smoother, almost gliding. The depth of field narrows, pulling your focus toward specific objects or faces while the background blurs into something hazy and ominous. Waking scenes, by comparison, are often shot handheld or with slight, deliberate imperfections, tiny movements in the frame that remind you this is reality, flawed and unpolished. It's a technique that trains the audience to recognize, even subconsciously, when they've crossed from one realm to another. The psychiatric facility, where Will and Mark are kept, is one of the film's most quietly oppressive settings. It's lit in cold blues and pale grays, the walls a sterile off-white that's less about cleanliness and more about erasure. There are no personal touches, no warmth, just the bare minimum needed to function. The cinematography here is rigid, locked-off shots, symmetrical compositions, emphasizing the institutional control over its inhabitants. This is a place where individuality is stripped away, and the framing makes sure you feel that. When Will and Mark escape, the shift to handheld cameras and looser framing gives an immediate sense of liberation, even as the danger outside waits for them. The party scene is a study in chaos, both narratively and visually. The lighting here bursts with warm tones, gold, orange, deep red, mimicking the comfort and energy of youth in its element. But as the Brute enters the scene, those warm tones start to die, replaced by cooler shadows and starker contrasts. The camera work changes too. Where it was once fluid and kinetic, following dancers and friends in playful motion, it becomes abrupt, almost jittery, as if the camera itself is startled. It's a visual representation of safety evaporating in real time. The climax on the dock is the production's crown jewel in terms of setting design. Built specifically for the film, it has the worn, creaking authenticity of a place that's seen decades of use. Wet wood, rusting metal railings, scattered fishing gear, all of it contributes to the sense of a location that could collapse under the weight of what's about to happen. Cinematographer Fred Murphy, who served as DP, used the water and mist to his advantage, letting light spill across the surface so that reflections danced and broke apart with every ripple. The dock is both a battleground and a cage. Once the fight begins, the characters are trapped, hemmed in by the black water on all sides. Lighting design throughout the film is one of its most unsung strengths. Dreams are lit like fever visions, bright where they should be dark, dark where they should be bright, creating a subconscious disorientation. The waking world, on the other hand, uses more traditional horror lighting techniques. Strong key lights that cast deep shadows, pools of illumination that force the audience to focus on one spot, while letting the rest of the frame dissolve into uncertainty. Practical lights, lamps, neon signs, car headlights are used strategically, giving scenes a grounded realism even when the events are anything but. Sound design, though not strictly visual, works hand in hand with the cinematography to shape the settings into living, breathing spaces. In the dream world, every sound is amplified and slightly warped. Footsteps echo too long. Whispers are unnervingly close, metal scrapes with a pitch that seems designed to drill into your skull. In the brute's environments, sound is stripped down. The crunch of boots on gravel, the faint hum of a fluorescent light, the splash of water on a dock. This sonic minimalism heightens his presence. You hear him coming long before you see him. Even the forest sequences, which might have been filler in lesser hands, are given careful attention. They're not lush, vibrant forests. They're damp, skeletal, the trees thin and widely spaced enough to make hiding impossible. The ground is littered with leaves that crunch underfoot, turning every step into a signal flare for the predator following you. These spaces feel indifferent to the human characters, a reminder that nature here offers no sanctuary. The production's approach to color grading ties all these settings together. Early scenes in the waking world have a muted palette, soft blues, pale yellows, that gradually becomes more contrast-heavy as the story progresses. By the time we reach the dock sequence, the colors are rich but cold, as if the entire film has been slowly draining the warmth out of its world in preparation for this final confrontation. Dream sequences are graded differently depending on their emotional tone. Some bleed with oversaturated reds, others with sickly green tints that suggest decay and disease. Camera movement is another subtle but vital element. In the dream manipulator's world, the camera often moves in ways that defy the space it's in, sliding past walls that seem to stretch, circling characters in impossible arcs. In the brute's scenes, the camera is often static or moves in deliberate, linear paths, mimicking his unstoppable advance. The rare times the camera moves quickly in his presence, it's because the characters themselves are fleeing, pulling us along in their desperation. The dock fight is a masterclass in integrating setting with action. The swaying of the dock adds instability to every move, forcing the fighters to adapt in real time. Lighting rigs hidden in the set mimic practical sources, dock lamps, boat lights, so that every explosion of sparks or plume of fire feels diegetic, part of the environment. The water becomes an active participant, splashing over the dock, reflecting firelight, obscuring movement. It's an environment designed to feel like it's fighting both combatants equally, a neutral territory that will claim whoever slips first. Even small transitional spaces are loaded with atmosphere. Narrow stairwells, cluttered basements, alleyways lit by a single flickering bulb. They're filmed in ways that exaggerate their claustrophobia. The depth of field is often shallow here, keeping our attention fixed on the character, while the background falls into a blur that could hide anything. It's a trick that makes the audience feel like they're sharing the character's tunnel vision, unable to see the danger until it's too late. In the end, the film's settings aren't just places where events happen, they're extensions of the story's themes. The dream world externalizes fear, making the intangible visible. The brute's physical spaces strip away illusions, forcing characters to face danger head-on. The town itself becomes a kind of liminal space between the two, a battleground where reality and nightmare bleed into each other. Through careful cinematography, lighting, sound, and production design, every location becomes a character in its own right, watching, waiting, shaping the way the story unfolds. And maybe that's why, even years later, the images linger. It's not just the monsters we remember, it's the way the streets felt too empty, the way the dock groaned underfoot, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath. The settings didn't just frame the story. They whispered it to us, one shadow at a time. From the very first day of filming, it was clear this wasn't going to be an ordinary production. There was an energy humming in the air, a mix of anticipation, caution, and that kind of giddy disbelief that comes with realizing you're actually about to make the thing people have been talking about for years. The crew often described it as stepping into a crossover comic panel and then realizing you have to figure out how to make it move. The set itself was an odd contradiction. Meticulously planned in some ways, chaotic and improvised in others. The art department had spent months designing everything from the decaying texture of the dream manipulators, boiler room, to the rust-streaked timbers of the dock, yet every day still brought unexpected variables that no storyboard could predict. Vancouver's weather was one of the most unpredictable co-stars anyone had ever worked with. One moment, the skies would be crystal clear, and the next, rain would come in sideways, drenching both equipment and actors. The rain wasn't always a curse. In fact, one of the film's most atmospheric shots, where the brute emerges from behind a haze of mist and moonlight, wasn't planned at all. It had been a miserable, wet night, and the mist rolling off the lake was entirely natural. The lighting team scrambled to adjust their rigs to catch it just right, and by some miracle, it worked perfectly on the first take. Everyone on set knew instantly that this wasn't something you could replicate in post-production. It was nature's gift, a moment the director later called a little wink from the horror gods. Between takes, the set was less about looming dread and more about shared laughter. The dream manipulator's actor, once buried under his hours-long prosthetic makeup, had a habit of turning into the class clown. He'd creep up behind crew members during lunch breaks, whispering their names in the exact same voice he used in the film, causing more than one coffee spill. There was one infamous lunch where he wandered into the catering tent, still in full costume, and began taking orders as though he was a server. "Soup of the day, your soul," he announced, ladling chicken noodle into a bowl for the script supervisor. The brute's actor, towering and quiet by nature, played his part with such physical control that he seemed genuinely terrifying in motion. Yet off-camera, he was gentle to the point of shyness, apologizing profusely if he even brushed past someone with his machete prop. One memorable moment came when a young extra, barely old enough to remember the original films, accidentally bumped into him between takes and froze in fear. He immediately pulled off his mask, crouched down to eye level, and let the child hold the machete, foam version, of course. The smile that broke across the kid's face was so genuine that even the grizzled grips nearby softened. The stunt rehearsals became a kind of private spectator sport for the crew. Watching the two stunt doubles, one lithe and whip-fast, the other built like a linebacker, practice fight beats was mesmerizing. The choreography looked brutal, but there was a strange grace to it. They'd slam into each other, roll across the dock, and then pop back up laughing, dusting themselves off. There was even a running joke that they were like an old married couple, bickering over whose move was going to sell better on camera. "You're going too slow, man," the dream manipulator's double would tease. "You're swinging like you're underwater." The brute's double would just shrug and say, "It's called weight. Try carrying this machete for 3 hours." Some of the biggest challenges came from blending practical effects with the stunt work. The dock fight, for instance, had sections that were designed to break apart mid-scene. Certain boards were scored so they would splinter under the right amount of force, but timing it was everything. Too early, and the fight lost its rhythm. Too late, and someone risked a real injury. On one take, the dream manipulator's stunt double hit the wrong section at the wrong moment, sending a board flying dangerously close to the camera crew. After that, they spent hours refining the placement of every step and strike, marking the boards with tiny, barely visible cues so the actors would know exactly where to plant their feet. The prosthetics team had their own daily battles. The dream manipulator's makeup could take up to 4 hours to apply, and that was on a good day. Sweat was the enemy, and under the hot set lights, especially during fight scenes, prosthetic edges had a tendency to lift. The makeup crew kept emergency kits on hand at all times, ready to dash in with adhesive and powder during breaks. There was one notorious incident where mid-take, a section near the jaw came loose. Instead of calling cut, the actor stayed in character, turning the moment into part of the performance by tilting his head just enough to keep the flaw hidden from the camera. The director was so impressed that he kept the take. The brute's mask presented its own set of problems. It was designed to look battered and authentic, but the heavy latex and limited ventilation made it unbearably hot during action scenes. The actor would often signal for water between takes, tilting the mask just enough for someone to slip a straw under. More than once, he'd joke that the scariest part of his performance was not fainting mid-swing. One of the most surprising stories came from the night they shot a dream sequence in an abandoned school. The location had been chosen for its naturally creepy hallways and peeling paint, but as the crew was setting up, they began hearing unexplained noises, footsteps on the upper floors, faint whispers when no one was there. The rational explanation was that sound was traveling from outside, but the whispers persisted even after security locked the building. The sound team caught faint murmurs on their recordings that night, though no one could explain them. Whether it was a case of overworked imaginations or something else entirely, the story quickly became part of the set's lore. The director encouraged improvisation, which sometimes led to unexpected gold. In one scene, the dream manipulator was supposed to simply taunt Laurie before disappearing, but in the moment, the actor decided to lean closer and deliver the line almost as a whisper, dragging out the syllables until the air between them felt claustrophobic. Laurie's startled reaction wasn't acting, it was her genuine discomfort. The crew loved it so much they decided to keep that exact take. There was also a lighter side to the improvisation. The Brute's stunt double once decided to fake a pratfall during rehearsal, deliberately tripping over a crate and splashing into the shallow end of the lake. The moment was so unexpected that the entire crew erupted in laughter, even the normally stoic lighting team. The double emerged dripping wet, machete held aloft like a trophy, and declared, "And that's how you end the movie, folks." Food became another bonding point. The night shoots meant the cast and crew were eating lunch at 2 a.m, and the catering team went above and beyond to keep morale high. On one particularly cold night, they surprised everyone with trays of steaming hot chocolate and grilled cheese sandwiches, served right there on the dock set. Even the actors in full costume joined in, sipping from mugs while covered in fake blood, creating a surreal, oddly wholesome scene. Weather delays gave birth to some of the most endearing moments. During one rain hold, the dream manipulator's actor convinced the makeup team to let him keep his gloves on and join the grips in a game of hacky sack, carefully avoiding the bladed fingers. Another time, the Brute's actor, still in mask, joined a group of extras playing cards in the catering tent. He didn't speak a word, just calmly laid down winning hands over and over, the mask hiding whatever smirk he might have had. As production went on, the camaraderie deepened. There were moments of frustration, of course, scenes that took too many takes, effects that didn't work as planned, but they became shared challenges rather than personal burdens. When the dock fight finally wrapped, the crew applauded not just the actors but the stunt doubles, the effects team, even the safety divers who had been lurking in the water just out of frame. Everyone knew that what they had accomplished required every single department working in perfect sync. By the time they filmed the final scene, ambiguous, open-ended, deliberately unresolved, there was a bittersweet feeling in the air. Cast and crew had spent months bringing these two horror legends to life, surviving long nights, unpredictable weather, and the unique pressure of fan expectations. As the last camera rolled and the director called cut, there was no triumphant cheer, just quiet satisfaction and a series of heartfelt hugs. The monsters took off their masks, the crew started packing up, and the set that had been a battleground for so many nights slowly dissolved back into just another location. And yet, everyone who had been there knew they'd been part of something unique, not just because of the film itself, but because of the strange, wonderful, often ridiculous moments that had happened when the cameras weren't rolling. Those behind-the-scenes stories, of whispered names in the catering tent, fog rolling in like a gift, and machetes turned into toys, would live on just as vividly as anything that made it to the screen. Fear in this story is not just an emotion, it's a commodity, a living, breathing force that can be cultivated, stolen, manipulated, and weaponized. From the first frame, the film tells us that fear here has a kind of alchemy. It doesn't just paralyze, it empowers those who know how to channel it. That is the heart of one of the film's most resonant themes, fear as currency. It's the dream manipulator's lifeblood, the source of his existence, and the thing he's been starving for in his absence from the waking world. Without it, he's not just powerless, he's forgotten, which in his world is a fate far worse than death. The Brute, on the other hand, does not consume fear in the same way. He doesn't need you to believe in him or remember him. He is inevitability given form. His killings don't depend on building anticipation or taunting his victims into terror. He kills because killing is what he is. In that difference lies the film's central philosophical clash. One antagonist feeds on the psychological landscape, manipulating and reshaping it to his advantage, while the other embodies the physical reality of violence, blunt, unstoppable, and final. The plot is essentially the meeting of these two extremes, a collision of metaphors made flesh. It's tempting to see them as two halves of a whole, two ways of understanding the concept of mortality. The dream manipulator is the fear of what might happen, the nightmare that plays out in our heads before anything touches us. The brute is the thing that happens regardless of what we imagine, the inevitability we can't outthink. Together, they represent the full spectrum of dread, the anticipation and the act, the mind's terror and the body's end. The symbolism in the settings deepens this. Elm Street, stripped of its suburban charm, becomes a liminal space, a place stuck between the safety its residents want to believe in and the history they're desperate to forget. Its quiet streets and shadowed corners are not merely backdrops, they're visual reminders of collective denial. The psychiatric institution, sterile and suffocating, stands as a monument to suppression, of truth, of memory, of fear itself. These environments mirror the psychological states of the characters, trapped, muted, contained, but never truly safe. Dreams themselves are the most obvious and potent symbol in the film. In the dream manipulator's hands, they are weapons, crafted landscapes that turn personal memories into battlegrounds. Every object in his dreams has a double life. A school hallway becomes a conduit for childhood trauma. A family home becomes a labyrinth where safety curdles into threat. The film invites the audience to see these dreamscapes not just as surreal horror, but as metaphor for how our past can trap us. You never simply wake up from your history. It follows you into your waking life, reshaping the choices you make. Water is another recurring motif, often tied to moments of confrontation or revelation. The final battle on the dock is drenched in it, literally and symbolically. Water here is cleansing and suffocating, a force that can both hide and expose. In myth, water often serves as a boundary between worlds, and in this story, it's no different. The lake is a liminal zone where neither killer has home field advantage, a place where the waking and dream worlds seem to overlap. The choice to stage the climax there reinforces the idea that this battle exists on the threshold between the mind and the body, the imagined and the real. The characters themselves carry symbolic weight. Laurie, for much of the story, is a vessel for the audience's perspective, a bystander drawn into the conflict, struggling to piece together the rules. But as the film progresses, she becomes something more. A symbol of resistance, of adaptation in the face of overwhelming threat. Her journey from reactive to proactive mirrors the way individuals move from being shaped by fear to shaping their own responses to it. She doesn't conquer fear, no one in this world truly does, but she learns to navigate it, to use it as a tool rather than let it consume her. Will's arc is laced with themes of truth and agency. His time in the institution is a metaphor for the societal silencing of inconvenient knowledge. He knows the danger is real, but he's been locked away, sedated, and labeled unstable to keep him from spreading it. His escape is less about physical freedom and more about reclaiming his voice. In the larger thematic landscape, he represents the necessity of speaking truth even when it's easier or safer not to. Mark, by contrast, embodies the cost of obsession. His drive to expose the truth about the dream manipulator blinds him to the other threats around him. In symbolic terms, he is the cautionary tale about focusing so much on one kind of danger that you fail to see another approaching from behind. His death underscores one of the film's grimmer themes. Knowledge does not guarantee survival. In this world, being right isn't enough. You have to be adaptable, lucky, and ruthless in your choices. The collision between the two antagonists is the most overt metaphor in the film, one that operates on both genre and cultural levels. In the simplest reading, it's a battle between two icons, each standing in for a distinct tradition within horror. The Dream Manipulator is supernatural horror at its most playful and psychological, bending reality and narrative itself. The Brute is the slasher archetype distilled to its purest form, silent, unrelenting, and unstoppable. Their fight is, in a way, a symbolic debate over which form of fear is more enduring. But on a deeper level, it's about the way different kinds of fear coexist in our lives. We fear the unknown and the inevitable, often at the same time, and neither ever truly vanquishes the other. One of the subtler thematic threads is memory, how it's kept, how it fades, and how it can be manipulated. The dream manipulator's weakness is forgetfulness. When people stop telling his story, he fades. That's a powerful metaphor for how cultural fears can lose their potency when they're no longer reinforced. The Brute, on the other hand, is memory-proof. He doesn't require the retelling of his myth. He's a recurring event, an unstoppable recurrence like a natural disaster. Together, they form a closed loop. One feeds on cultural memory, the other on physical presence, and both are sustained by the inevitability of violence in human life. Fire and heat serve as counterpoints to the water motif, most notably in the Dream Manipulator's boiler room, a personal hell forged from industrial decay. Fire here is not cleansing but consuming, a reminder of the character's own origins, and a symbol of the rage that fuels him. In the final act, when fire meets water in the dock explosion, it's as if the two elements are acting out the same war the characters are fighting. The mind's feverish chaos colliding with the body's cold reality. Even the film's humor, dark as it is, has thematic resonance. The dream manipulator's taunts are laced with wit, his violence theatrical in a way that invites uneasy laughter. It's a reminder of how fear and entertainment often walk hand in hand, how audiences can be drawn to horror, not just for the adrenaline, but for the catharsis of laughing in the face of danger, so long as it's at a safe distance. The brute's silence, by contrast, offers no such relief. He is the joke with no punchline, the story with no moral, and in that way he reminds us that some fears can't be diffused with humor. From a symbolic standpoint, the fight on the dock is almost ritualistic. Each blow they exchange feels less like combat and more like the fulfillment of some mythic cycle, as though they were always meant to meet here. The destruction of the dock parallels the destruction of the boundary between their worlds, and when they both emerge from the water at the end, wounded but alive, it's the visual embodiment of the film's refusal to resolve its central tension. Fear in both forms survives. In the end, the film's themes and symbols are tightly bound to its structure. Every setting, every visual motif, every shift in lighting or camera movement reinforces the central ideas about fear, memory, and inevitability. The monsters are more than monsters. They're embodiments of how we experience dread, how we live with it, and how we sometimes, fleetingly, learn to wield it. The humans caught between them are not just victims or survivors. They're stand-ins for us, navigating the delicate line between acknowledging fear and being consumed by it. And maybe that's why, despite its fantastical premise, the story resonates on a level beyond spectacle. It understands that fear is never truly defeated, it only changes shape. Sometimes it hides in the shadows of our neighborhoods, sometimes it follows us into our dreams, sometimes it wears a burned grin, sometimes it wears a blank mask. But it's always there, waiting, because it's part of the human condition. The film doesn't promise escape. It promises something truer, the knowledge that even when the fight is over, the fear will find a way to return. It's strange, isn't it, how a film can begin as just a title in your mind, maybe something you vaguely remember from posters in a video store window or from friends whispering about it at school. And then, when you sit with it again, really sit with it, it unravels into something far richer than you expect. That's what happens here. You press play expecting blood, spectacle, and the satisfaction of seeing two horror giants share the same screen. And yes, you get all of that in generous, unapologetic doses. But somewhere between the opening sequence and the final shot, you realize there's more going on, something that lingers long after the credits roll. We've walked through this together, piece by piece, like moving through the rooms of a haunted house, each space revealing another detail, another layer. We began by sinking into the plot, feeling the slow pull of inevitability as two entirely different breeds of nightmare found themselves on a collision course. We traced their first ripples of influence. The manipulator of dreams reaching out from the shadows of memory, starving for attention, and the hulking brute cutting through the waking world with the kind of deliberate inevitability that makes the ground feel less solid beneath your feet. We stepped into those key moments, the murders that shifted the air in the town, the dreams that made the walls of reality feel paper-thin, the party where chaos bloomed in seconds, the psychiatric escape that was as much about reclaiming truth as it was about physical freedom. We followed Lori as she went from bystander to someone who could stand in the middle of two warring titans and not crumble. We followed Will's arc from voiceless confinement to decisive action, Mark's obsession and the cost it demanded, and the way every supporting character seemed to reflect a possible fate. Denial, surrender, or the hard work of survival. Then there was the first half slow build to that realization. The only way forward was to force these two predators to turn on each other. The plot's tension hinged on that gamble, on whether human desperation could manipulate forces so far beyond human control. We watched it unfold in the second half. The bait laid in dreams, the pull into the waking world, the violent meeting of philosophies made flesh. When the dock became their arena, it felt less like a location and more like a ritual space, something built in the architecture of the story long before the set was ever constructed. The board swayed under their weight, fire met water, and each strike was both a physical blow and a thematic statement. Chaos versus inevitability, performance versus presence, the mind's games versus the body's certainty. No winner declared, no fear defeated, just the understanding that these forces will always find each other again. We didn't just trace the plot, we looked closely at the people caught in its orbit. In character analysis, we saw how Lori wasn't simply our eyes into the story, but became its heart, carrying the film's themes of adaptation and resilience. Will stood as a testament to the necessity of truth, Mark as a warning of obsession's price. And the monsters themselves, more than just killers, emerged as archetypes, embodiments of two very different relationships to fear, one needing memory, the other defying it, one thriving in manipulation, the other in brute force. From there, we peeled back the curtain on the production itself, stepping into the spaces between the camera setups and the scenes we know, the dock that swayed in the fog, the make-up chairs where transformation happened before dawn. The fight choreography that was less about random brutality and more about constructing a dangerous kind of ballet. We heard the strange stories, the whispers in an abandoned school during a night shoot, the missing prop glove, the weather that wouldn't follow the schedule, but occasionally gifted the production with unrepeatable beauty. And always the laughter between takes, the odd warmth that bloomed even in a world drenched in fake blood and latex. We stepped into the settings not just as locations, but as characters in their own right. The muted, hollow streets of Elm Street, the suffocating sterility of the psychiatric institution, the chaos of the party scene where safety turned on a dime, the dreamscapes painted in warped lines and wrong colors. Brute's stark, open hunting grounds where there was nowhere to hide. And finally, the dock liminal space, battleground, threshold between waking and dream, each place designed to amplify the forces at play, to remind us that horror isn't just in the people or the monsters, but in the spaces that hold them. Then there were the themes and symbols, the heartbeat of the film, fear as currency, the inevitability of violence, memory as both weapon and weakness, water as a threshold, fire as rage incarnate. Dreams as battlegrounds where the past is rewritten, every motif folding into the next, building a framework that made the spectacle more than just spectacle. It became a kind of conversation between ideas, each one embodied in the characters and their choices. And maybe the thing that stayed with us most, beneath the blood and bravado, is that the film doesn't lie to us. It never promises safety, never offers a final resolution where one fear kills the other and the survivors walk away free. It knows that fear changes shape. It might wear a burned grin today and a blank mask tomorrow, but it's always there, waiting in the quiet spaces of our minds and the darker corners of our streets. The final shot doesn't tie a bow on the story. It opens the door again, leaving us with the knowledge that the fight is not over, because it can't be. That, I think, is why it still resonates after all these years. Yes, it's a mashup of two of horror's most enduring icons, but it's also a story about the dual nature of dread, about how we live with it, confront it, and sometimes even turn it against itself. It's about the people who try, knowing they might fail. It's about the strange communion between audience and story, how we want to be scared, how we invite fear in so we can face it on our terms. It's messy, it's contradictory, it's operatic and absurd and darkly funny, and that's what makes it feel alive. So here we are, at the end of our walk through this particular nightmare. We've wandered through its streets and its dreams, stood at the edge of its dock, felt the heat of its fire and the cold of its water. We've met its people, fought alongside them, and stood back to watch as forces beyond their control tore into each other. We've stepped behind the camera, into the makeup trailers and the rain-soaked nights, and we've looked closely at the images and ideas that make it more than just a fight between two monsters. And if you've made it this far with me, if you've sat in this space, exploring not just the story but the craft, the meaning, and the quiet human truths hidden under the noise, then you're exactly the kind of person I love making these deep dives for. This isn't just about one movie. It's about the ways film can be both entertainment and reflection, both escapism and a mirror we sometimes don't want to look into. If you want more journeys like this, more nights spent in strange towns, more walks through the shadowed corridors of film history, more quiet dissections of the stories we think we know, then stay with me here. Subscribe to the channel, join the conversation, and bring your curiosity. Every film has its hidden layers, and together we can peel them back piece by piece. Because if there's one thing I've learned from exploring stories like this, it's that the real magic isn't just in watching, it's in watching closely. It's in seeing the way fear moves, the way characters change, the way the smallest detail, a flicker of light, a line of dialogue, the angle of a camera, can shift the entire shape of a scene. It's in the conversations that come after, in the connections we make between what's on screen and what's in ourselves. So until the next film, the next deep dive, the next shared journey into the shadows, keep watching with that kind of attention. Keep asking the questions, keep finding the patterns, and keep letting yourself get lost in the worlds filmmakers build for us. Because somewhere out there, another story is waiting, and I can promise you, it's going to be worth the walk.